My name is Claire Donovan. I'm 31 years old. But the most painful memory of my life happened when I was just 12. It was Christmas Eve. The house smelled of roasted turkey and pine needles. The tree glowed with gold lights, and carols hummed faintly from the radio. Everyone else remembers holidays as warmth and laughter. I remember mine as a knife. Because that night, I leaned close to my mother, gift in my trembling hands, and whispered, "Merry Christmas, Mom." She didn't smile. She didn't hug me. She didn't even look at the present. She stared straight into my eyes and said, very softly, as if she wanted the words to brand themselves into me forever, "I wish you were never born." The music kept playing. The tree kept shining. My father laughed in the other room. But for me, the world split open. Something inside me cracked that never healed. I spent years after that moment trying to be worth loving, bending myself into shapes I thought might please her, starving for any scrap of kindness. But it didn't matter. I was invisible, disposable. That night, a part of me died. But another part was born, the one that would never forget, the one that would wait. And years later, on another Christmas night, my mother would be the one kneeling at my feet, begging me for forgiveness. If you're watching this right now, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. And before I tell you how it happened, how the daughter nobody wanted became the woman with all the power, make sure you like this video and subscribe for more revenge stories that will leave you breathless. I grew up in a house that never decided what it wanted to be. Some days it tried on warmth like an outfit pine-scented candles, casserole steam fogging the kitchen window, the radio murmuring soft. Other days it went cold-blooded and efficient. Drawers slammed, clocks clicked too loud, my mother's voice turned into a blade that shaved the air clean. There were 4 of us, technically. My father, who lived behind a newspaper like a billboard for a man who had once existed. My mother, who ran the house the way a conductor runs an orchestra. With precision, with temper, with a baton that could become a weapon. My sister, Hannah, sunlight with legs freckled, bubbly, an accidental commercial for the best version of girlhood. And me. I was the afterthought, the missing line on a to-do list. Some children grow crooked. I grew quiet. If you held our family up to the light, you'd see fingerprints. My mother's on everything. She believed in good manners, the way other people believed in God. She ironed even our socks. She set the table and then moved the fork a quarter inch to the left, chasing an idea of perfection that kept sprinting away from her. She could not catch it, so she punished whatever stood still. Mostly me. Hannah was the golden hour personified. It wasn't her fault. She didn't ask for the spotlight. She just glowed. She sang in the church choir and hit the high notes that made old women put a hand to their chest. Ribbons seemed to tie themselves obediently in her hair. Teachers spelled her name correctly without being told, as if the world came preloaded with Hannah. Meanwhile, I was Claire. Who? The attendance sheet pause. The second child, down to my bones. Christmas told the truth best. Each year my mother wrapped presents in 2 distinct styles. For Hannah, satin bows, gift tags with hand-lettered curlicues, paper that matched the exact gold on the tree. For me, paper from the discount bin, tape slapped crooked, my name printed in the small cramped script of someone paying a bill. I pretended not to notice. Children are fluent in pretending. I developed a specialty in swallowing. My father would sit in his brown chair beside the lamp, reading the sports page, offering commentary at the safe edges of life. Packers by a touchdown, he'd say, a neutral headline of a man. He wasn't cruel. He was something worse in a house like ours. Absent while being present, a ghost that could drive, an apology without the words. I learned early that sound carried differently, depending on who made it. Hannah's laughter was music we all had to stop and listen to. My laughter, when it escaped, seemed to knock things off shelves. I learned to keep it inside. I learned to keep everything inside. On my 12th birthday, months before the Christmas that cut me, I asked for a cake with blue frosting and tiny white sugar pearls. My mother made lemon. "It's more sophisticated," she said, sliding it on the counter with the finality of a judge's gavel. The kitchen filled up with lemons and disappointment. When I blew out the candles, I made the kind of wish you can't say out loud. Let there be a place where I am not the extra piece. Halfway through the polite clapping, my mother's phone rang. It was Hannah, calling from a sleepover 3 blocks away to report she'd won a game. She'd learned a dance. Someone's mother said she had star quality. My mother went into the pantry to hear every detail. The door clicked shut softly, and then not softly at all. The cake went dry in the air. I cut myself a second slice and ate it like penance. Report cards came. Mine wore little stars and teacher comments about discipline, diligence, excellent work. My mother's mouth shaped itself into a straight line that meant, "Stop saying it out loud, I've heard enough." "Good," she'd say, as if I'd finally stopped being a problem and started being furniture. Then she'd add, almost kindly, "Don't let it go to your head." Hannah brought home a trophy from the county recital, and we all drove out for ice cream. I clapped. I learned to clap convincingly. I practiced in the mirror. At school, I sat in the front row and made myself useful. I sharpened pencils when they squealed down to nubs. I collected worksheets and lined up the edges. I loved rules because they held still for me. The librarian taught me how to cover the big hardback novels with clear plastic and a ruler. There was a pleasure in smoothing the air bubbles out, in convincing the world to lie flat for once. Home was a weather system. My mother's good moods arrived, dressed in productivity. The baseboards gleamed. The fridge shelves stood at attention. The sink refused to hold a single dish. Her bad moods wore silence first, then an inventory of failures. "Who put this mug here?" she'd say, holding evidence. "Whose hair is in the drain?" She asked the questions the way a cop asks on television, already knowing the answer. Sometimes she tried to be tender. I can say that, now that I've learned not to hate the attempt. She would stroke Hannah's hair and say, "You're my angel. To me, you're my worker bee." Said without cruelty, almost with pride, as if the hive flourished this way, as if everyone knew the honey came from somebody else's sting. I made myself small in the evenings, a cat in human clothes. I did dishes. I took out the trash before it thought to smell. I reheated dinner for my father when he came home late and set his plate on the placemat with the whales, because he liked the whales. He would say, "Thanks, kiddo," without looking up. Gratitude like static, faint, and everywhere. Hannah and I slept in rooms across the hall. She pinned programs to her corkboard choir, recitals, awards nights that required dresses and applause. I taped my A papers inside the closet. That way, I could open the door and see proof that I existed to someone, if only to a red pen. On Sundays, we went to church and sat in the same pew, 3 from the back, because God, like my mother, was a creature of habit. Hannah sang. People turned their heads and smiled in the slow-motion way of admiration. Afterward, we stood in the parking lot, and my mother accepted compliments like she'd baked them. She gets it from her father. She'd demur, and he'd chuckle without owning it. I stood beside them and held the casserole dish like a third arm. I wasn't unloved exactly. That's the lie you want because it's clean. The truth was duller and meaner. I was loved as a function. I made a bed, a dinner, an A. I was a verb in a house that preferred nouns. That fall, my art teacher announced a winter showcase. We could choose any subject, any medium. "Tell me what winter feels like to you," she said, like it was easy. I thought of the way our windows iced in the corners, feathery, delicate, as if frost had handwriting. I thought of the space between my mother's voice and her eyes. I painted a tree at dusk, with a single bird on a bare branch, a tiny dot of red in a world of white. I named it Waiting. When I brought it home, my mother was elbow-deep in a roast. The kitchen smelled like rosemary and hot aluminum. She didn't look up. "Hang your backpack, Claire," she said, and I did. I set the painting on the counter and smoothed its edges like a bedspread. "It got chosen for the showcase," I said, quiet but brave. "That's nice. Knife through carrot. Hannah needs the car Thursday." I stood there with my bird on its lonely branch. I stood there until standing felt like a mistake. "It's Thursday," I said. "The show." "The car," she repeated. "We can't be everywhere." I told myself I understood. The words lined up all polite in my head. I took the painting upstairs and slid it under my bed and lay down on the floorboards to breathe the dust and the faint chemical bite of acrylic. I told myself I didn't paint to be seen. I told myself a lot of things that year. The night of the showcase, my art teacher stood beside my empty easel and said my name as if I were present. The bird on the branch did not sing. Hannah needed the car for rehearsal, and needing beat deserving the way rock beats scissors. I walked home afterward, hands shoved deep in my coat as if pockets could aspirate grief. The sky above me had the brittle clarity of December. The stars looked like thumbtacks on a corkboard you couldn't reach. You think you can store a slight like a seed, and it will stay small, manageable. It doesn't. It grows in the dark like anything else. It grows down and around and into you. No one waters it but you, and still, it thrives. By the time the tree went up that year, I knew better than to ask to help. My mother had a method, and my fingers were all wrong for it. She placed each ornament with military logic. Angels to the front, colored balls in diagonals, no two similar shapes touching. Hannah tossed tinsel, and it landed cheerfully. She had that luck. I sat at the dining table and cut snowflakes from white paper until the floor looked like it had dandruff. I taped them to the window in careful rows. On Christmas Eve afternoon, the house performed festivity. Cranberry sauce quivered in its glass dish. The clock above the stove breathed in seconds. My father fixed the wobbly leg on the coffee table and declared it shipshape, which made no sense unless you imagined our whole living room doing a jaunty tilt across the carpet. I wanted the night to pass without incident, like a truck you hear in the distance and then don't. I wanted quiet. I wanted to be nothing at all. Instead, I decided to try again. Children are astonishingly resilient that way. We present our softest parts to the same teeth. I took my painting out from where it slept in dust bunnies and slid it into a simple wooden frame I bought with babysitting money. I wrapped it in the last piece of silver paper and used 2 ribbons because one felt stingy. I wrote the tag in my neatest hand. To Mom because winter can still have color. When she unwrapped it after dinner, everyone had that polite, ready smile that households keep for lukewarm gifts. My mother set the paper aside and held the frame away from her face, as if it might splash. "What is it?" she asked finally. "A cardinal," I said. I could hear the hope in my voice and wanted to unhear it. In winter, it's about waiting, about staying. "It looks lonely," she said, and that was it, the verdict. She glanced at the tree, at the far side where the wall was bare. "We don't have a nail over there. Your father—" "I can get a nail," I said. I stood up too fast. The chair scraped a yelp out of the floor. My father spread his hands. "Slow down, kiddo." Hannah tapped her nails on the arm of the couch in a little drum solo of impatience. My mother rose, frame in hand. "The mantle?" She squinted at the garland like it was guilty. "Number, the colors will fight." She moved toward the fireplace, thinking, calculating. Something in her face softened for a second, the way a sky goes pale right before snow. I might have misseen it. "You know what?" she said. Let's not clutter tonight." She opened the screen, and in one clean, practiced motion, fed the painting into the fire. There was an instant before the heat found it one breath where the cardinal still existed, red and stubborn. Then the paper puckered and blackened, the color crumpling in on itself like a bruise forming. The frame cracked softly, a twig underfoot. The room stayed very polite. The radio kept playing some choir's idea of heaven. Hannah said, "Mom, not a protest, more a headline." My father's newspaper snuck back up, a white flag. My mother shut the screen and fixed the garland so its little berries faced forward. She turned to me and smoothed the front of her sweater. "We'll do something proper later," she said, moving her hand in a circle that meant someday, not today. I watched the bird turn to smoke. I felt the heat on my shins, a mean kind of comfort. I knew then, with the certainty you get once in a life, that I could become ash here if I let myself. That staying would be a slow burning. That in this house, even beauty had to be useful, and if it wasn't, the fire would make it so. I didn't cry. It felt like giving her a ribbon she hadn't earned. I went to the sink and ran cold water over my wrists until my skin ached. When I came back, my mother had already moved on to rearranging the Nativity Mary an inch to the left, the baby angled toward the audience, no one daring to look tired. She hummed along with the carol, as if music forgave everything. Later that night, when the house finally slept, I stood in the glow of the tree and stared at the place where a nail should have been. The wall looked back, blank and patient. In the fireplace, a curl of ash still held the suggestion of a wing. That was the year I began to understand the shape of my life. Not the details yet, not the escape routes or the cost. Just the outline. A house that kept accounts. A mother who collected silence. A girl with red on her hands that no one else could see. And somewhere, in that quiet, a promise the size of a seed. Teenage years are supposed to be a rehearsal for freedom. You're meant to practice being someone, to try on mistakes like thrift store jackets until one fits. Mine were different. Mine were a long audition for my mother's approval, and no matter how well I performed, the role was already cast. Hannah was the star. I was the understudy no one expected to see on stage. By the time I turned 14, I had a small museum of certificates tucked into a shoebox under my bed. Honor roll, perfect attendance, essay contests. Everyone signed with a different teacher's name, each one offering me a lifeline that never quite reached my family. Good job, my teachers said. You have potential. But when I carried those papers into the kitchen, my mother's face shut like a door in a storm. She'd glance once, fold the page in half and say, "Don't let it get to your head. Plenty of kids do well. Nothing special. Nothing special." 2 words that shaped my adolescence. They wrapped around me like a second skin. When Hannah came home with a shiny medal from choir regionals, my mother displayed it in the glass cabinet by the front door, right between the china teapot and the crystal swan. When I came home with a ribbon for debate, she clipped it to the fridge with a magnet shaped like a cow and said, "We'll move it later." Later never came. I told myself I didn't care. That words were just air, and air can't bruise you. But sometimes, late at night, I caught myself wondering, if I vanished, if my bed stayed cold, my shoes empty, would they finally notice the silence? Would the house feel lighter without me dragging it down? That thought frightened me, not because it came, but because it stayed. High school is brutal enough without a mother who sees you as extra baggage. I studied like survival depended on it. Maybe it did. Straight A's became my weapon, my currency. If my family wouldn't love me, maybe at least they'd respect me. The day I got a letter saying I'd been chosen for the state science fair, I walked home with the envelope pressed against my chest like a secret. My project had taken weeks, testing water samples, logging data until midnight, drawing graphs until my eyes blurred. My teacher told me I had a chance at winning. I set the envelope on the kitchen counter, waiting for my mother to finish her phone call. She was pacing, coiling the cord around her fingers, laughing into the receiver. I stood there with my news clamped between my teeth. Finally she hung up. "What's that?" she asked. "I got picked for the state fair." My voice shook, half from excitement, half from dread. She opened the envelope, skimmed the first lines, then placed it face down on the counter. "That's nice, but don't let it distract you from real responsibilities. You still need to help Hannah practice her solos." That was it. My triumph had a shelf life of 7 seconds. Dark thoughts multiply when no one interrupts them. I started to picture myself as a ghost already, walking the halls, transparent. I watched my reflection in bathroom mirrors at school and thought, if I disappeared, would anyone know today was the day? But life is sneaky. Even in the middle of despair, small defiances sprout. Mine was writing. I filled notebooks with words that no one would ever read, pouring myself into sentences that at least had the decency to listen. Then came Christmas. Always Christmas, the season of knives disguised as ribbons. That year, the dining room table groaned under platters of food, ham glazed and glossy, potatoes creamed to perfection, a cranberry sauce that glistened like jewels. Relatives arrived in coats puffed with cold air, voices high with holiday cheer. Hannah floated around in a velvet dress, passing cookies, the star of the pageant. I walked in quietly, wearing the same hand-me-down skirt from last year. The dining table stretched long and wide, enough seats for everyone. Almost everyone. I scanned the chairs, counted. My chest tightened. One short, there was no place set for me. At first I thought it was a mistake, that someone would notice, shuffle things, slide an extra chair from the kitchen, but no one moved. No one even flinched. My mother walked past me with the carving knife, smiling at Uncle Ray. She didn't look at me. She didn't need to. The message was written into the empty space at the table. You don't belong here. So I stood. I stood at the corner of the table, plate in my hands, trying to pretend this was normal. Aunt Maggie noticed first. Her eyebrows drew together, pity-carving lines across her forehead. "Claire, sweetheart, why don't you sit down?" she asked, half rising. Before I could answer, my mother cut in smoothly. "We ran out of chairs. It's fine. She's fine." Her tone was sugar over steel. The room hushed, then reanimated with careful chatter. Everyone turned back to their plates, embarrassed for me. Pity is a heavy coat. It burns hotter than hate. I ate standing up, each bite like chalk. My legs ached, but I stayed silent. I felt their eyes flick toward me and then away, as if looking too long might make them complicit. Hannah laughed at some cousin's joke, golden curls bouncing. My father passed the salt without meeting my gaze. The lights twinkled above the table, but they may as well have been knives. That night I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, my stomach heavy with food that refused to settle. I thought of the missing chair. Just wood and nails, but it was more than that. It was proof that in my mother's blueprint of family, there was no room for me. I promised myself something under those blinking Christmas lights. One day, I won't just stand at the table. One day, I'll own the table. I didn't know then what shape that promise would take. I only knew it rooted itself deep inside me, growing darker and stronger with every holiday that came after. Leaving for college felt less like a departure and more like a jailbreak with paperwork. I signed forms, I packed boxes, I arranged my life into milk crates and duct tape the way you do when you're young, and convinced gravity is optional. My mother didn't cry. She dusted the hallway baseboard after I dragged my suitcase past it and said, "Close the door behind you, Claire. It's drafty." Freedom does not arrive with trumpets. It comes as a hallway that smells like floor wax and someone else's laundry, a dorm room the size of a thought, a window that sticks at the corners. It's the first night when nobody calls you for help and nobody calls you by the wrong name, and you lie there on a mattress thin as a sentence and feel the universe alter by a millimeter. I lay awake and listened to the radiator burble and thought, this is mine. The small ache that followed reminded me that scars don't stay at old addresses. They forward themselves. Classes began. I chose the hard ones because rigor had always been a kind of mercy for me. Numbers, systems, the quiet usefulness of logistics, things that could be steered. In a world where love was a storm map, I wanted the comfort of a chart. Work found me before I found it. The financial aid office offered federal work study, and I said yes before they finished the sentence. My first shift was at the library, dawn, when the building is still wearing its dream. I learned the way spines sound when you reshelve them correctly, an obedient slide, and the way dust lifts up at sunrise like a secret being told. I wiped tables, straightened periodicals, learned the names of people who spoke to books as if persuading them to open wider. It was quiet there, a kind of chapel that didn't ask for hymns. Quiet doesn't pay tuition. So I stacked jobs like sandbags. After my library shift, I rolled carts of trays in the dining hall, scalding my hands on hot water that smelled like metal. On weekends, I took the closing shift at a diner off campus, where the menu was laminated, and the coffee came in a pot that never quite got clean. The owner, Sal, had a voice like gravel, run through a mixer, and an honesty that felt almost medicinal. "You show up on time, you get the good section," he said, and I laced my shoes tighter. There's a particular holiness to scrubbing a floor at 2 a.m. No audience, no applause. Just the squeak of your sneakers and the slow change from dull to shine. It's the opposite of childhood, I thought, pushing the mop in steady figure eights. In this world, if you work at something, It looks different when you're done. Exhaustion became a second language. I learned how to nap in 20-minute slices between classes, how to study standing up so I wouldn't fall asleep, how to keep granola bars in every bag like lifeboats. My hands developed a permanent constellation of little burns and paper cuts. When my classmates complained about being so tired, I smiled and poured coffee, and thought of the word tired like a room with more corners than they knew. But somewhere in the middle of all that bone-deep spentness, something new took root. Value, not as a concept my mother measured, but as the feeling of handing a tray to a student and hearing, "Thank you," ring true, or watching the library stacks line up straight as soldiers because I made them that way. I was a verb in motion. But in this place, verbs were the point. The first winter I stayed on campus through the holidays. I told everyone I was saving money on travel, that I wanted the quiet. Both were true. Also true. The idea of going home made my lungs sting. The dorms emptied out like a tide pulling back, leaving the halls hollow. I worked extra shifts, counted tips, bought a pair of boots that didn't leak. On Christmas Eve, I microwaved a frozen dinner and ate it on the library steps under a sky that looked like crushed glass. I told myself the cold felt like clarity. I told myself a lot of things. Sometimes they were even true. Spring came in a rush, as if someone kicked the door, the diner filled with kids who wanted milkshakes and new beginnings. Finals arrived with their special brand of terror. In the library, I watched panic bloom across faces and thought, there's a business here. Not panic, but the gap between what people can do and what they have time to do well. My first idea was small and a little desperate, like most first ideas. I called it Redline Cheap, fast editing for essays, resumes, applications. I put up flyers printed 5 to a page to save ink. I used a picture of a red pen hovering over a paragraph, merciful and precise. Fix your commas, save your GPA, the copy read. It sounded jaunty and faintly ridiculous, which is a fair description of me at 19. The orders trickled in, then poured. Every all-nighter someone pulled because they'd left it too late turned into an email to me at 2:11 a.m. Can you look at this? Please. I'll pay extra. I set up a price sheet that rewarded organization and punished emergency, and still, it was mostly emergency. I worked in the library until midnight, and at my desk until dawn, sending back paragraphs that stood up straighter. I wasn't a genius. I was careful. Careful counts for more than people think. Success is noisy. It makes you giddy, then sloppy. I said yes to everything. I hired 2 classmates and paid them in cash and burritos. I learned that people like to be told what they're good at. I learned that trusting them with timelines is a different sport. The first missed deadline landed like a drop tray. The second turned into a waterfall of apologies and a refund I couldn't afford. I kept smiling, kept mopping, and underneath, an old heat rose. The need to be undeniable. In April, a professor accused a client of plagiarism because 3 sentences in her paper sounded too adult. She cried in my inbox. I rewrote, documented, footnoted like a lawyer presenting evidence to God. We won. I slept 12 hours and woke up with my face on my keyboard, the keys imprinted backwards on my cheek like a private code. May brought commencement gowns and the particular panic of freshmen, realizing they weren't freshmen anymore. I made enough money to pay down a chunk of tuition and buy myself a real coat. I also made myself sick, headachy, brittle, living on cafeteria, coffee, and the kind of sandwiches you eat over a recycling bin. Redline was working. I wasn't. The crash came, as crashes do, painless right up until it wasn't. Teen. A client's graduate school application disappeared into an email black hole the day of the deadline. It wasn't my fault. Their server hiccuped, or the internet bit down on a wire. But they had paid me to shepherd it. In the economy of trust, responsibility is the currency. I refunded the fee, wrote the program director a letter so elegant it could have worn pearls, and still, it sat on me like a debt. Somewhere between 3 a.m. and sunrise, I admitted what I'd been circling. The way I was doing this was unsustainable. Redline closed for restructuring. which is what you call it when you fold a thing gently and set it in a drawer you don't open for a while. Failure is a museum with better lighting than success. It shows you things you walked past before. I could see, suddenly, how badly I'd wanted to prove a point to people who would never come to the gallery. I could see how hard I'd tried to outrun a sentence my mother spoke on a winter evening, the way you run from your own shadow at noon and think you're winning. Summer, I took more shifts. I saved. I read about small business accounting because it felt like learning the rules of a game the house had once cheated me at. I wrote in notebooks with cheap covers and expensive lines, ideas, mistakes, do-nots. I underlined the words higher slower and say no until the page looked wounded. In the fall, I tried again. Not redline, not exactly. I named the new thing Cardinal, because sometimes you get to choose your omens, and because I wanted to pin that flash of red to something that wouldn't burn. Cardinal wasn't about last-minute miracles. It was housekeeping for lives, errands, moving help, weekend apartment cleanouts, make my chaos smaller, anything that could be itemized and done with a checklist and a timer. I knew how to do short, honest work that made a dent in the universe. I knew how to be careful. We printed the flyers on thicker paper. We said no to anything that sounded like a lawsuit. We bought a used hatchback that smelled faintly of old fries and named her Agnes because she kept going no matter how loud the world got. We tracked everything. Miles, hours, tips, the peculiar satisfaction of leaving a studio apartment as gleaming as a new promise. I hired one coworker, then two, then three. I learned to interview people not for their charm, but for their willingness to do the last 10% right. Cardinal didn't scream success. It hummed. The money came in steady instead of dramatic. My body stopped vibrating like a tuning fork. I slept 6 hours, then 7. I answered emails during daylight. In the diner, Sal patted the counter with his big hand and said, "Look at you, standing taller," which is old man, for I'm proud of you. The day I landed our first real contract, weekly upkeep, for a small law office, with more files than shelves, I let myself be happy out loud. I walked out into the bright flat noon and dialed my mother from the sidewalk, the way people call from mountaintops they climbed alone. The phone rang 3 times. I had time to imagine the conversation, her voice soft for once, the tilt of surprise, the possibility of congratulations landing somewhere near my heart. She picked up. "Yes? Mom," I said. "I got my first big client. It's steady work. I'll be able to—" She didn't let me finish. She laughed. Not cruel exactly, dismissive. The sound a cashier makes when the register tells her what she already knew. "Don't pretend," she said, and the ice in her voice transported me home faster than any airplane. "Your sister is about to perform at the city concert. That's what matters." There it was, familiar as the radiator's burble. I stood there with the law office's key heavy in my pocket and watched it happen again, at a distance that should have protected me. The world kept moving. A bus sighed. A man in a suit jaywalked and didn't get punished. I said, "Okay, because there are some arguments you only have by yourself." She was already somewhere else. "I have to go," she added, a phrase that did not sound like apology in her mouth. When the line went dead, my reflection stared back at me from the diner window across the street. Hair pulled up, shirt sleeves streaked with the day, eyes bright and a little feral. It was not the face of a girl asking for permission. It was someone who had learned to count her own victories because no one at home knew how to tally. That night, after everyone left and the law office sat tidy as a row of teeth, I stayed. I ran a cloth once more along the conference table until I could have shaved in the sheen. The building's HVAC sighed like an animal settling. I thought about Hannah on a stage somewhere, lights catching in her hair like gossip. I thought about my mother in the audience, mouth tilted into pride, as if she wore it the way other women wear lipstick. I thought about a red bird on a white branch and a fireplace that asked no questions. And then I wrote a list. Not of what I'd done, but of what I would not do again. I would not call home with my good news and beg for confetti. I would not measure my days against someone else's ovation. I would not let a voice from a kitchen decide the volume of my life. I locked up, tucked the key into my pocket, and stepped into the city night. Somewhere far away, a siren started and then lost interest. My breath ghosted in front of me. The future did not open like a door. It shifted, a fraction, the way light changes when you move your head. Enough to see by. The next morning, I woke before the alarm. My legs ached the clean ache of earned work. Agnes started on the first try. I brought the crew coffee, nothing fancy, just hot and honest, and we loaded bins into the hatchback like a parade nobody clapped for. It felt right. Hannah texted a photo of a bouquet as big as her torso, all pinks and whites. Crushed it, the caption read. My mother texted a heart. I typed congratulations and didn't send it. I set the phone face down and looked at the list I'd made. A small wind moved through me, as if a window I hadn't known existed had opened. We spent the day clearing a one-bedroom apartment for a nurse moving to the night shift and a new life. She'd been too tired to do it herself, her eyes ringed with the gray of heroic exhaustion. We boxed her books, wiped her pantry down to the last breadcrumb, scrubbed the ghost of handprints from the wall around the light switch. When we were done, the rooms looked like they were waiting kindly for whoever came next. The nurse pressed cash into my palm and said, "You're a lifesaver," and the word didn't feel like hyperbole. My palm warmed. Value again, not as a number on a ledger, but as a shape you can hold. I didn't call my mother to tell her. I didn't call anyone. I took the long way home along the river and watched the water carry the day away without complaint. At night, the old thoughts still knocked. You don't evict a past, you sublet it. But now there was something else with them in the room. The steady, stubborn feeling that I was building a table board by board. If no one saved me a chair, I would sand the edges myself. I would stain it the color of a cardinal's wing and bolt the legs so tight the whole thing could hold the weight of a family if it had to. I slept. When dreams came, they were less the replay of a sentence and more a blueprint. The bird still perched on its winter branch, but it looked at me, and for once, it did not seem alone. Adulthood is supposed to be the escape hatch, the place where you finally get to rewrite your own script. And in some ways, I did. By 27, I had my own company, small but sharp, lean as a knife. The kind that cut cleanly through chaos. Clients liked me because I never left a task half done, because I returned calls at midnight, because I said yes when most people said maybe. Success stacked itself around me in tangible ways. First, a real office, with frosted glass doors, and my name etched on the front. Then a new car, glossy black, the kind of machine my classmates used to daydream about while flipping through magazines. Finally, a high-rise apartment downtown, tall windows overlooking the city lights that glittered like applause I didn't have to earn. On paper, I had outrun everything. I could buy shoes without checking the price tag. I could take a weekend trip on a whim. I could sit in restaurants where the napkins were cloth instead of paper. I had built a life so different from my childhood that sometimes I didn't recognize it as mine. But at night, the ghosts came back. They always did. Every December, like clockwork, the same dream visited me. I was 12 again, standing in front of the Christmas tree, the lights burning too bright, my mother leaning down, her lips brushing my ear, whispering, "I wish you were never born." The words were softer in the dream, more like a lullaby than a curse, and that made them worse. I woke up each time with the taste of ash on my tongue, my chest tight, as if I'd been holding my breath for hours. It didn't matter how expensive the sheets were. The voice found me anyway. Family didn't care. Not about the company, not about the apartment, not about the fact that I'd made it out. They only called when bills piled up, when a car broke down, when Hannah needed a little help with rent, until her music picked up again. My father's voice was always half apologetic, like he knew he was only the messenger. My mother's was sharp, businesslike. "You've done well. You can afford to help." I wired money sometimes. Other times I didn't. Either way, gratitude was scarce. I could have handed them gold bars, and my mother still would have found a way to remind me that Hannah's voice had been featured in a church bulletin, or that my cousin's kid got into a gifted program. They were fluent in erasure. I told myself it didn't matter. I had my own table now, my own walls, my own name carved into glass, and yet Christmas remained the weak spot. One year, I decided to stop pretending I didn't care. I told myself it was curiosity, not desperation. I told myself I just wanted to see what the house looked like now, how the tree stood, how the years had shaped them. Lies, all of it. What I wanted, what I couldn't admit even to myself, was to be seen. So I drove out on Christmas Eve without calling ahead. The roads glittered with ice, headlights carving tunnels through the dark. My stomach knotted tighter with every mile. I parked across the street from the old house, its windows glowing warm, silhouettes moving behind the curtains. Laughter carried across the lawn. I told myself I'd just stop by. Just walk in with a bottle of wine, say hello, see their faces soften when they realized the forgotten daughter had made time for them. Maybe this would be the year something shifted. The door wasn't locked. It never had been. I stepped inside, the smell of cinnamon and ham hitting me like a memory that hadn't asked permission. Everyone was gathered in the living room, a chorus of coats and scarves, glasses of punch in hand. Hannah stood by the tree, radiant as ever, her voice lifting in a song I recognized from childhood pageants. For a moment, no one noticed me. I almost thought I'd slipped in like a shadow. Then my mother turned. She didn't smile. She didn't open her arms. She didn't even look surprised. Instead, she tilted her head, her voice carrying easily over the chatter as the room fell silent. "Who told you to come here?" The words landed like glass shattering in a quiet room. Heads turned. Cousins stopped mid-sip. Even Hannah faltered on her note. I froze, the bottle of wine heavy in my hand. No one moved to welcome me. No one laughed it off. No one reached for a chair. The silence was the chair. The silence was the message. You don't belong. Not here. Not ever. I managed to mutter something. I just thought, but the words died before they formed. My mother was already turning back to Hannah, clapping politely, as if my intrusion had been a commercial break in the real show. I stood there long enough to feel the pity in my relative's eyes. Pity. Always pity. Then I set the wine on a side table and left. The cold outside was almost a kindness. At least it told the truth. That night I drove back to the city, the highway lights flashing overhead like a metronome. I thought of the apartment waiting for me, warm and bright. I thought of the contracts lined up, the success no one in that house cared to acknowledge. And still, beneath all of it, the old promise burned. One day, I won't just stand at the table. One day, I'll own the table. It wasn't bitterness anymore. It was clarity. Because that night, as the echo of my mother's voice replayed, "Who told you to come here?" I finally understood. I didn't need their permission. I didn't need their chair. I would build something so unshakable that one day they would come knocking. And when they did, I wouldn't be the one standing. It didn't happen quickly. Families don't collapse overnight, no matter how much you want proof that the rot was always there. It starts with little shifts, mail that stacks, calls that go unanswered, a tone in my mother's voice that turns from brass to tin. By autumn, the weather knew before I did. The sky dulled early, and everything in me went still, like an animal listening for a storm it can already smell. The first sign arrived, folded into legal white. A certified mail slip, my name written in a hand that belonged to nobody I loved. Inside, a notice of intent from a bank I didn't use, a house I didn't live in. My parents' address, the one with the tree that used to scrape my window when it was windy. Past due, fees accumulating. Language so polite it felt insulting. I stood at my kitchen island, turning the letter over, as if the back might be kinder. The kettle clicked off. The city below my window glittered with errands. I set the notice down like a hot pan and poured tea I wouldn't drink. The second sign was Hannah's silence. For years, her life arrived in bright bursts, videos of rehearsals, programs, the afterglow of applause. Then, nothing. Weeks. I texted. A neutral weather report of concern. No reply. My mother answered instead, brisk and elliptical. "She's fine. She's busy." I knew that tone. It was the sound of a curtain. The third sign knocked on my door. I opened it to my mother on my threshold, smaller than I remembered, as if the years had been shrinking her in secret. She wore her best coat, the one she saved for weddings and funerals, and the hem had frayed without her permission. Wind worry-birded her hair around her face. She was not the woman who once held a room together with 2 fingers and a list. She looked like someone who had been waiting in a lobby too long. "Claire," she said. I didn't step aside right away. Old instincts are rude that way. Then I did, because habit is stronger than fury. She stood in my foyer, as if she could become a tasteful piece of furniture by posture alone. Her eyes did a fast inventory of my life, the clean lines, the good couch, the view that made people whistle, and I watched the math she didn't want to be doing. "Tea?" I asked, because I was raised to offer people things they hadn't earned. She shook her head. "No, thank you." We sat at the table, not the family table, not the one that had never found a chair for me, mine. "I'll get to it," she said, folding her gloved hands, as if an agenda would make this civilized. "Your father's been unwell." The pause contained a diagnosis. "The hospital bills," her mouth thinned, "and the mortgage. Things have been complicated." "Complicated," I repeated, because sometimes repeating is more honest than responding. Her eyes flicked up, met mine, slid away. "Hannah's between engagements." Between," I said lightly, the way you say weather. "We need help." The words came out raw, unfinished at the edges. Then she corrected herself, steadied. "I'm asking for your help." There it was. Not an apology. Not yet. A request dressed as duty. She said "we," as if we were a we. "Do you remember," I asked, "the year I came home for Christmas without calling? The year you asked who told me to come?" She looked down at her gloves. She stopped. "It was a busy night. You said it loudly." I said, conversational, like we were discussing traffic. "You wanted it to carry." My mother took a breath that sounded like an argument paging through a script for a better line. "I was wrong," she said finally, each word a coin she didn't want to spend. "I'm here because I have to be. I wouldn't—" She caught herself, changed tense. "I didn't think I would ever be." And for a moment I saw the house again, the ring of the good plates, the hum of the radio, and her moving through it like a general. I saw the woman who fed my painting to the fire with a flick of her wrist, who calibrated Christmas like a machine. And then I saw this version, uncertain where to put her hands. "How much?" I asked. The numbers were not small. They filled the room, the mortgage in arrears, interest that moved like mold, the hospital's relentless math. I opened my laptop and asked for specifics. She had them, of course. She always had the receipts. "Why me?" I asked quietly, though I knew. "You're able," she said. She said it as if able were a character flaw. "We've always been proud of how hard you work." Proud. A new word, rolled out for the occasion, thin as hotel soap. I could have said no. I could have let the bank do what it does, and watched the house that raised me turn into a commodity, a listing with flattering photos and a bland description that omitted ghosts. I could have told myself it was justice to sit this one out. I could have said, "I wish you had a daughter who cared." I thought all of it in about the time it takes to hear your own heart. Instead, I said, "I'll fix it." My mother blinked. "You will?" "I will," I said. And then, because I am not the girl who stands at the table anymore, I added, "But we do it my way." She straightened, reflexive. My way," I repeated. "You'll give me authorization to speak to the bank, to the hospital. I'll purchase the mortgage if it comes to that. I'll restructure what can be saved. In return, you'll come to Christmas at my place this year. All of you. The whole family." I held her gaze. "We'll do it right." Something moved across her face. Suspicion, hope, fear of the price she couldn't yet see. "Of course," she said, with the grace of someone who thinks she's only agreeing to turkey and polite conversation. "That's generous." "It is," I said. My voice was flat, not cruel. Flat like a surface you can build on. She rose to go, eager to escape the echo of what she'd asked. At the door she hesitated. "Claire," she said, and in that moment she sounded almost like a stranger asking for directions. "Thank you." I nodded. "Drive safe." When the elevator closed around her, the apartment exhaled. I stood at my window, and watched a cloud drag its hem across the skyline. Then I made calls. Banks speak a language I learned out of spite. Decimals and deadlines. Penalties wearing lipstick. Hospitals speak another. Codes and charts, and the kind of mercy you can only see on paper. I listened. I negotiated. I paid. I bought the mortgage the way you buy back something stolen from you a long time ago. The deed slid across a desk toward my hands. I signed. The pen pressed through to the page below. At night, I planned. It would be a good Christmas. The best we'd ever had, if you measured by spectacle. My place, my table, the kind of feast you read about in old books. I made lists: food, seating, music, light. I called a florist who understood winter, and a caterer who understood that the trick of abundance is small bites arriving often. I ordered a tree so tall the delivery men asked, "Are you sure?" I was. I always had been, under everything else. The guest list was simple. Family, every last one of them. I mailed invitations printed on heavy stock, the kind that lands with a thud in your mailbox and makes you feel chosen. At the bottom, in smaller script, I wrote, "Dress in holiday colors. Arrive at 6. Come hungry." None of them would know about the papers filed, the fees waived, the mortgage with its new owner. Not at first. We would begin with warmth, as a kindness, as theater. I would give them the Christmas I wanted at 12. Chairs for everyone, name cards, napkins folded into clever shapes. Hannah would have a place beside the piano, if she wanted to sing. My father would have a chair that didn't wobble. My mother would have to sit with her back to the room's largest mirror, because some truths are easier when you can't watch yourself learn them. This is where people misunderstand revenge. They think it's a scream. It isn't. It's a stage. It's lights set just so, and a script that waits in your throat until the room is listening. On the morning of, I woke before the city. Snow had fallen overnight, a thin, expensive dusting that made even the ugliest corners look curated. I walked the rooms and touched everything that would hold us: the polished table, the glasses lined up like tiny bells, the extra chair I'd rented just to know no one could forget one. The tree glowed in its corner, hung heavy with glass birds, the color of blood and berries and forgiveness. The cardinal near the top tilted its head, as if it had a line. When I was done, I stood in the doorway and looked at the life I'd built, the quiet muscle of it, the way it held. The girl from the fireplace stood beside me, soot on her cheeks, red on her hands. "Ready?" she asked. "Ready," I said. By 6 o'clock, the elevator kept opening to coats the color of candy, to voices pitched too high with holiday, to the smell of perfume and cold air. They came in blinking at the tree, saying the right things, touching the right surfaces. Hannah hugged me hard and fast, then stepped back, her eyes shining with a sheen that wasn't only joy. My father shook my hand as if we had just met under agreeable circumstances. Last to arrive, as always, my mother. She paused on the threshold, gathering herself into the shape she recognized. Then she smiled the practiced smile that had once ordered a whole house into obedience and said, "It's beautiful, Claire." "It is," I said. "Come in. Everyone's waiting." They were, for food, for grace, for a Christmas that felt like a story you tell yourself about your family when you need to sleep. We sat, chairs for everyone, name cards written in my hand. The room warmed with the weight of bodies and expectation. I raised my glass. Conversations tucked themselves into quiet. "Before we eat," I said, "I have a few things to share." My mother's smile tightened, an instinct bracing for a draft. Hannah reached for her hand under the table. My father watched the wine in his glass as if it might tell him how the evening would go. I set the papers on the table, crisp as snow. "This is our home," I said, and felt every pronoun rearrange itself. "And this year it belongs to me." The words hung in the air, too heavy to be brushed aside like crumbs. For a moment, no one moved. Forks froze mid-air. Hannah's hand slipped from my mother's ply. My father's glass hovered, trembling just enough to ripple the wine. I let the silence stretch, let them feel it. Then I slid the deed forward, the official seal catching the light. "The mortgage, the debt, the late fees, every number you've been drowning under. They're mine now. I own them. I own the house." How? A murmur traveled down the table like a draft. Cousins glanced at each other, trying to read the rules of this new game. My aunt coughed into her napkin. The chandelier hummed faintly above us, the only sound brave enough to fill the pause. My mother's lips parted, but no sound came out. She looked at the paper, the way someone looks at an animal they can't decide is tame or wild. I leaned back, my voice steady, almost gentle. This isn't charity. It isn't a handout. Tonight is about acknowledgement. Because for years I was the invisible one in this family. I was the girl without a chair at the table, the one you wished away. And yet, here we are. You need me. Hannah whispered my name, half plea, half warning. I kept my eyes on my mother. So I'll ask, just once, in front of everyone. Admit what you said. Admit what you did. Then ask me for forgiveness. Gasps, muffled, from down the line. Someone dropped a spoon. My mother's face went pale, then flushed, then pale again, cycling through emotions like a radio tuning through static. Claire, she began. No, I cut in. Not excuses. Not I was busy, not I didn't mean it. I want the truth. Say it. The room tightened. Even the tree seemed to hold its breath. Her eyes darted around the table, searching for rescue. None came. Even Hannah stared down at her lap, unable to lift her gaze. Finally, with a voice scraped raw, my mother whispered, I said it. That night, I told you I wished you were never born. The words were brittle, fragile, and yet, finally, they belonged to her, not me. Tears slid down her cheeks. Her hands trembled as she pushed back her chair. The scrape of wood on marble echoed like a verdict. Slowly, painfully, she lowered herself to her knees. Please, she said, voice breaking. Please, Claire, have mercy. Gasps again. A cousin covered her mouth. My father sat rigid, staring as if the air had betrayed him. Hannah sobbed quietly, her shoulders shaking. I looked down at my mother, the woman who once ruled the house like a tyrant, now small and bent at my feet. The sight should have satisfied me, and in a way, it did. But there was also an emptiness, vast and echoing, opening inside me, because revenge doesn't stitch wounds closed. It only proves they exist. I helped her up. My hands were steady, hers were not. You'll keep the house, I said. You'll pay me back, on my terms. But never again will you pretend I don't exist. Never again will you forget my chair. She nodded through tears, her face streaked and ruined in a way I had never seen. Dinner resumed, but nothing tasted the same. Every laugh was brittle, every forkful hollow. My victory sat between the dishes like a fifth course no one wanted to touch. That night, after they left, I sat alone beside the tree. The lights blinked red and gold across the glass ornaments, each flash a heartbeat. I thought of that little girl, 12 years old, clutching a handmade gift only to watch it burn. I thought of the missing chair, the pitying eyes, the phone calls that never came. Now I had it all, the table, the house, the power. I had made my mother kneel, and yet, staring at the glow, I felt only the quiet truth. Revenge fills your hands, but empties your heart. I whispered into the stillness. I got what I wanted, but Christmas will never be a day of miracles again. Oh, the tree hummed on, indifferent. The city outside sparkled, careless and bright. And that is my story. The night my mother wished I had never been born, and the Christmas years later when she had no choice but to kneel before me and beg. Was I too cruel, or was it justice long overdue? Sometimes I wonder if revenge is ever really about balance, or if it's only about finally being seen. I can't answer that for you. All I know is that my scars were louder than my forgiveness, and in the end, I let them speak. What about you? What would you have done if it were your mother? Would you have walked away, or would you have demanded the same kind of reckoning? Tell me your thoughts in the comments. I want to hear your voice in this conversation. And if you want more revenge stories that twist, unsettle, and linger long after the screen goes dark, make sure you like this video and subscribe to HLT Revenge. Because when enough is enough, revenge always finds a way.